Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, considering thoughts from Grant McCasland, Tim Deruyter, and artificial intelligence on the sideline.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. He's the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. And yes, today, make sure the ears are cleaned out because we're going to be taking in some sound. We will get to Texas Tech defensive coordinator Tim Deruyter and some thoughts on the defensive side of the football as Red Raider spring football camp rolls on. But wanted to begin the program, Chris, as we take a listen to a guy I'm not sure many Red Raider fans have even heard the voice of. That is what is expected to be your next head men's basketball coach, Grant McCasland, current North Texas head coach. They've got an NIT tip-off coming up tonight. You win that championship game later in the week. Either way, yada, yada, yada. Yes, I'm yada, yada, yada-ing the NIT. If you missed yesterday's show, well, you missed this tidbit from Chris Level, that there is some expectation of resolution this week one way or another, Chris. I don't know when his team will be finished with the tournament, but it seemed like you had some fairly strong words about a general timeline this week that we could expect maybe to see something bubble up to the surface finally, as we've been waiting for some resolution, right?
Yeah, I think everything points to Coach McCasland here. I think the lull in any kind of activity, I think the Texas Tech has found their guy. And I just think I think the lull has been created by I'm going to guess, and you'll hear him in a second kind of explain why it's so important, but I just think he wants to see it through, as we've touched on with his team here, and this is a North Texas team. It's kind of funny because you've got some Conference USA teams that are still playing here. Okay,
yeah.
I mean, and UAB is on the other side of the NIT semifinals, and then old Florida Atlantic is made it to Houston in the Final Four, and Grant's team lost, I think, to Florida Atlantic twice this year by 4 points each time. And as we know, it's a really good Florida Atlantic team. So,
man, you're making me think too of Mike Oresco. Isn't that the Conference USA commissioner? I think, and he's always out there. He's like, "See, I told you, it was Power 6. It's Power 6." Wrong sport, Mike. Actually, this one we do allow for a Power 6. But it ain't you. It's the Big East. Sorry, I just had to get in that shot because I always enjoyed the humor in the football approach to the Power 6, which Conference USA beat that drum louder than anybody.
Yeah, and that's, I think a lot of times they try to, it's like witchcraft, like trying to make you see some things that aren't there. But in this case, I guess you do have a team in the Final Four, and you've got two in the NIT finals. But yeah, but I do think as soon as their last game is played, I think we get closure here. Now, I think it's not immediately after. Look, and there was a part of what you'll hear here in a second is there was a press conference in Las Vegas yesterday. Nobody asked Coach McCasland at all about Texas Tech that I could determine, and
right. That was interesting, wasn't it? I thought that was a guarantee.
Yeah, so. The folks in Las Vegas may not actually be covering it a ton. I think there's some folks from North Texas that are up there covering it for the Denton paper or whatever, the campus radio station, whatever you have. And so maybe they're just not too inclined to be curious about that. I don't know, but
if we cover our eyes, they can't see us, kind of thing.
Yeah,
don't tell.
That's exactly right. So.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, but
well, let's go ahead and take a listen to Coach McCasland, because I think this does tie into what I've seen in some YouTube comments and heard from some Locked On Texas Tech viewers and listeners. Kind of a general feeling, and I think we had this comment yesterday on yesterday's show, a feeling of it ain't the Final Four, it's the NIT. Get on to the next job. Obviously, teams have gone on with interims or whatever after their head coach has taken another job. You see it play out in bowl games year after year after year. And I guess some fans are frustrated with the fact that hadn't played out here. Look, I don't know what the right answer is or how you want to handle it, but I think you want to try and bridge the gap as gracefully as you can. So I'll just hope that there's some motivation based in that. But we wanted to bring you this sound from Coach McCasland and let you have a chance to first hear his voice if you haven't heard it before. He is a real human, not a bot, not sentient AI as far as we can tell. Though maybe that's coming up around the bend. Be cheaper that way, right? Wouldn't have to pay an 80-year-old dude. I just got off on a tangent there, and my brain is just working overtime on AI head coaches. Okay, next coaching change, maybe we'll get into that. But I also wanted to let you kind of get a feel for his vibe as it relates to the NIT, because I think you can detect some care factor and some things that are kind of in that category here. Here is current North Texas head coach Grant McCasland.
Guys will tell you that the moment we unfortunately didn't win the conference tournament, I went in there and tried to turn the page as quick as I could and just told them, like, I love being with them. They love being with each other, and we're going to go win an NIT championship. And so that's a hard it's no fun. You walk in those locker rooms in those moments, and there's a severe amount of disappointment, but because of the experience that we had, and I know how much fun it was to do that, and when you get there, I just didn't want anything to linger. And everybody tells these guys that we're going to make the NCAA tournament. We know we were past the next group out. Even though we did have the best net of anybody that didn't make the tournament, and even though we had the best road record of anybody in the country and best neutral road besides University of Houston, just felt like our team was capable of winning a championship and wanted to make sure that they knew that we had a new plan that we needed to play for. So that was a part of it. I knew this team loved each other and just needed another opportunity and some time. And so tried to turn the page as quickly as possible.
Because what he was asked is, hey, you've won an NIT championship before as a part of the Baylor program years ago. And so that's why I think he's kind of going on past experiences. And basically what I hear him saying is, this team wasn't just ready to call it quits and go their separate ways just yet. We wanted to kind of keep going. They like being around each other. I think there's some good experience to be had. He was also asked in some separate ways about, because I think a lot of these kids have come back, okay, and I think there's some tenured experience, not just old, but experience together with their team, which is why they're on the cusp of winning 30 games. But he pointed to, Florida Atlantic as well, and said the same thing about them. And that if you go look at Dusty May's roster at Florida Atlantic, are going to Houston. Ironically, the one transfer that Florida Atlantic has came from Texas Tech, baby. We provide to all. I mean,
we're the farm system. We
send them out into the world, and they just flourish, man. It's like
fly.
Because my man Vlad Goldine was about as good and dominant of a player in that entire regional as there was. And I think
excuse me, Chris. Charles Barkley called him Vlad Kareem Golden. So that hurt even worse to hear. I mean, good grief.
I mean, geez. But every one of those other guys are guys that have stayed around Florida Atlantic and all that. And so I think Coach McCasland was kind of talking about, and so what I hear him ultimately saying, okay, using Florida Atlantic as an experience, using his own team as an experience, because he even said when we upset Purdue in the NCAA tournament a few years ago, because Purdue has lost these 3 first-round matchups against, a 13, a 12, and a 16, I think, in 3 consecutive years. Well, I think the first one was against North Texas. I think McCasland's team pulled that off a couple years ago. But they had a ton of guys back, okay, on that team. And so they were very experienced together. But what I hear him ultimately saying, it's the culture word. It's like, we have a good culture. We have good kids. Kids don't want to leave. Now, that's Pollyanna-ish a bit to think that you're not going to have kids that go into the portal and all that stuff. But the premise is still the same in that, my team likes playing for each other, with each other, want to keep going, all those things. So we'll see what it looks like tonight at 6:00.
Make of that what you will, and of course, stick with us through the week, as we're not quite sure when the resolution could come to the surface. But obviously, if they're bounced from the tournament, heads are going to be on a swivel, but need to remain that way. I think either way, as we get to the end of the week, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube so you never miss an episode with anything that might be covered here with Grant McCasland and the future of the head coaching search, artificially intelligent or otherwise. Okay, we're going to leave the round ball there. Let's get to the oblong ball. That didn't roll off the tongue as smoothly as I thought it might in my head. Football is next. Spring camp is in progress, and we've already heard from offensive coordinator Zach Kittley here recently. We're going to hear from defensive coordinator Tim Deruyter coming up next. We'll get to some big picture things as far as some experience on the roster, the process of acclimating yourself to being a Red Raider for some of these newcomers. Also a secondary that I think is really, really an interesting talking point heading into the season, something to focus in on as you see a little bit of shuffle there, but also some really key returners on the back end of Tim Deruyter's defense. We'll get to all of the above coming up next on Locked On Texas Tech. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Appreciate being your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Hope you'll check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen. One stop college hoops shop. And I've heard from some, hey, Casey, we want to make multiple stops in a college hoops shop. We don't like just a one stop. Fine. Go back over and over and over again to Locked On College Basketball for your second listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, switching gears from hoops to spring camp. Joey McGuire and the Red Raiders underway, and wanted to take a listen today to defensive coordinator Tim Deruyter on a couple of different topics. Obviously, had a very impactful season for Texas Tech as a team overall. On the defensive side of the football last year, it felt like that has been the thing really for a number of recent years, I guess I would say. That has led your team. That's been the best aspect of your football team as far as you were going to go, or otherwise it was going to be because of what your defense was going to be able to achieve. I think even going back into the Matt Wells era, you've had some teams like that. Probably not something that maybe Tech fans are all that accustomed to, but if you look close, I think that's mostly been the reality. So a lot of people happy with Tim Deruyter, I think, in West Texas. Was glad to see him be here in the first place and glad to see some of that fruit that he was able to produce in a short amount of time. But Chris, as we roll into another season now, there are guys who are quote unquote experienced within Tim Deruyter's scheme and what he wants to see on the field. Obviously some newcomers now going to be in the mix as well, but I was interested to hear Coach Deruyter speak on some of that experience and some of the process, I guess I would say, when it comes to acclimation and some of the things they go through during this time of year. Here is Coach Deruyter.
The difference is it's the same package, or for the most part, we tweak it every year. But our install schedules has been taking a sip out of a fire hydrant for these young guys. The older guys, they've got 1,000 reps in it, so we've been able to put it in quicker. But I've been impressed with guys like Steve that he hasn't flinched. And a lot of our younger guys, BJ, Brendan Jordan in secondary, he's picked it up like he's been running it for a while. So, some guys are swimming a little bit, but other guys, it's impressive to see their football IQ.
And Calvin, I think it's funny because I think both Zach and Tim kind of have similar mindsets this spring in that they have so many guys back, which is why there's some expectations with this team. But they have so many guys back. They've been able to install their stuff quicker and more of it. And I think that's where you start taking next steps as a program whenever you really get into, hey, these guys know what we were doing. And in fact, they're surrounded, like the new guys are surrounded by so many veteran type guys that have played so many snaps in a certain system on either side of the ball, which makes it so much easier for the new guys to kind of acclimate because everywhere they turn, somebody's got an answer for them. But, and then that's when go ahead.
Chris, I was going to say, too, I think as a fan, sometimes you just think, all right, they're out there practicing repetition. But you can't have productive reps until the install has really taken root, right? Like there's a whole installation phase where you've got to kind of understand what needs to be repped, because until that point, the reps may not be yielding what you need them to. So that's one thing I think is easy, at least for me, speaking personally, to gloss over as a fan kind of when you hit, practice time. But that's a big advantage. I mean, it goes without saying experience is an advantage, but I think that's one of kind of like on a more local level, that's one of the reasons why it can be a big advantage.
Yeah, and I think like Steve Linton, for example, I think it's important to note that part of their eval process when they go looking into the portal and like they're like, hey, we need a pass rusher. They look into, hey, how bright is this kid? How much can he comprehend and grasp football and all those different kinds of things? Because we I don't want to say they run a complex scheme on that side of the ball, but there's something to it. I mean, there's a lot of different things that they're doing and all that, and so you've got to be able to comprehend some of that. So I think it's worth mentioning that in their recruiting process and the portal process, they bring in kids that they check that box too, or they feel like it. Like, hey, he can pick up what we're doing and grasp it and go coach it. Because, like, for example, a guy like Jesiah Pierre, I think the light came on, late in the season last year, and I think once he started to kind of grasp the scheme, because it was everybody's first year, in Tim's system. But once the light came on, it's like, okay, I got it now. But I think that's important to note about Linton, who I always think it's funny because they always say, man, they're swimming right now. Is swimming hard to a lot of people? Because that's always like the analogy that they use. Most people, if you throw them in water, they're not going to sink. I mean, they'll be able to swim or just bob.
Maybe it just like requires all of your energy, all your body's focus and energy. Maybe like we get halfway through the season, Chris, and they're 6-1. We'll hear Joey McGuire say these boys are on the lazy river. They're just floating now, baby. They're just floating now. I think the intelligence aspect of that is really interesting. And I always think of Jimmy Johnson when that kind of thing is brought up, because he had so many quips about smart and dumb football players, one of which was something along the lines of hit me in the head with a hammer the next time I take a dumb guy. Because even simple schemes can become complicated or complex to a dumb guy. And it's not like they all got to be Rhodes Scholars out there. Obviously not. But the advantage of someone who can be, and it's not like intelligence, like, I'm over in the biology lab right after football practice. To me, it's not really that kind of intelligence, Chris, but there's like some maturity. There's some even-keeledness that is all wrapped up in that, because when the first starts flying, things start breaking down. A smart guy, in whatever capacity or however you define that, personally, I think is a guy that's more adept at adapting. That's really all I would say it almost comes down to, is just being able to adapt. So it's not like, what's the square root of such and such, and they can offer that up on a plate, though. Maybe some of them can. I don't know. But I think it's maybe as an ability to adapt, which kind of means working on the fly. And if you're a little bit more quick or whatever it might be between the years, you've got an opportunity to do that. I think Jimmy Johnson, I don't know if I've ever heard another coach talk about it more. You're a Cowboys fan. I'm sure you got some of those memories, but just don't give me dumb guys. I can work with an undersized guy that's not a dumb guy. But Coach Johnson seemed like he was the dude that was really waving that banner, at least in my lifetime of watching football, that I really remember.
Michael Irvin could be sleeping in a team meeting and another guy could be sleeping that couldn't play. And it's like, well, Mike can do whatever he wants. Right. You, on the other hand, you're cut. I think Kervin Richards was his name. The running back.
Kervin. Nobody recalled Kervin, the playmaker.
Yeah, swerving Kervin Richards. There was there may have been a linebacker from Texas A&M too that was shown the door just because he was being a knucklehead, if my memory serves. But yeah, I'm think
glad you could throw that in.
there you go.
Shown the door.
There you go. Ruffin McNeil used to say this all the time, and Ruffin's, whenever he kind of took over as DC, it was all about energy and motivation and just this try hard kind of aspect, and it was fairly base package. But he'd always used to say, the reason I do that is clear minds equal fast legs, And so the quicker kids can grasp it and understand it, you play faster. And if it's a split second faster here or there, sometimes that's a difference in getting there to make a tackle or giving up 60-yard touchdown run. I mean, that's just the reality of
That's true.
the margin for error on the sport. I mean, like we'll talk about this in tomorrow's show, but the pro day is tomorrow for Texas Tech athletes. A bunch of scouts will be here. Tyree Wilson, I don't think will go through a ton, but I say split second matters because you're trying to tell me that a 4.3 it doesn't. What's that compared to a 4.5? Yeah. I mean, the NFL folks would tell you, well, that's worth this much money. I mean, if you're this much faster. So anyway, that's the only reason why I bring that up. But it's got to be fun for Tim to have so many guys back, though. I guess is the whole point.
The ability to play fast, but also recognize things very quickly.
Yes.
And I think if you're just unencumbered kind of between the years as far as being uptight or whatever way you want to describe it, clearly you can be a better football player. I think, Chris, for my money's worth, I mean, there are a couple of positional groups on both sides of the football, clearly, that I would rank pretty high as far as offseason focuses and priorities, at least for me as a fan, just generally as far as what I think is really important when it comes to Tech trying to take the next step and what generally I'm interested in seeing be better than it was a season ago. I've touched on things like the offensive line. It doesn't mean always, though, that, hey, they were bad and now they need to be good or something like that. One of the interesting spots I really feel like on either side of the football, any phase of the game, is the defensive secondary, because you really had some impactful players within that group a season ago. You had some impactful returners from that group a season ago that we'll see in 23, but also some of the more interesting additions or newcomers, San Diego State transfers we've talked about before, CJ Baskerville, among some others. So one of the spots I think you would be wise to focus in on as a Texas Tech fan this offseason is that defensive secondary. And here is, once again, Tim Deruyter. But first, today's episode brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. And with the NCAA tournament on and popping right now is the perfect time to get busy, get signed up, and get started with FanDuel. And right now, new customers are in a prime spot to be on the receiving end of that no sweat first bet. We're talking up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet don't bank, baby. $1,000. So just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Then you can lay it all on the line on everything from the money line to point spreads, which team is cutting down the nets, all on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use, even if you're a first timer. So don't miss your shot at the no sweat first bet, up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up and make every moment more with FanDuel. So one of the spots I think you would be wise to focus in on as a Texas Tech fan this offseason is that defensive secondary. And here is, once again, Tim Deruyter.
The new guys that are on campus are really, really talented. I mentioned before, BJ's really stood out. At times you can see, our corners run. Mo Horn's done a nice job out here. Now he's got experience, so he should be able to understand things. But Jordan's been really good. Chapman's flashed at times. He can really run. He's got to get thicker. And then CJ's act like, he's played before. He's a guy that, you would expect that, who's played, Division I snaps. But he's come on and he understands, the system. The terminology is different, but he understands where to be, and he's going to be a physical presence out there.
Yeah, so he touches on several of the new pieces, and so some of the guys that he mentions are going to play the positions that, say, Marquise Waters did in CJ Baskerville's case, and then I think there's some opportunities for some corners or some slot type stuff that Kobe Minor, Reggie Pearson's positions. Tyler Owens will move into the starting spot vacated by Reggie Pearson, but you need depth there. And then I think you need a third and a fourth corner. And I think Jordan Sanford is somebody, and Mo Horn, who was dinged up a bit last year. So those are the spring really is about people like Tim just talked about. It's not for – it is for everybody. But, I mean, it really is about some of these youthful guys that really need to take the next steps and really need to work their way in and learn, because opportunities are going to be there for them. And it's just a matter of which one of them takes it,
Yeah.
And these are some freshmen here. These are some redshirt freshmen, and this is a portal guy in Baskerville's case that have all come in here. Maurice Horn, he would have played some last year had he not been dinged up, but I think he kind of missed much of the year. So I think that, this is a big spring for him, just kind of acclimating. Fall camp will be big for him as well, because, Kobe Minor, people didn't probably think too much about it at the time, but he would have been like next up, in my opinion, as starting corner if one of your starters would have gone down, and really kind of considered a semi-starter with some of the experience that he had and all that. And I think he obviously wanted to start, so I think he's playing at the University of Indiana right now. But that was a sneaky tough loss, if that makes sense. I think some guys in the portal you lost, and it didn't. But you've got plenty of guys that can fill that role. You're trying to identify who they are, and I think Tim just lists off several of them now.
A couple of specific guys before we're out of here today I want to get to from Coach Deruyter. He's already mentioned the name Steve, that being Steve Linton, and he's mentioned Jesiah, Pierre. Let's start with the newcomer and Steve Linton, because I already feel like the hype balloon has got some air in it for Mr. Linton, Chris, and I couldn't pick the guy out of a lineup, so I will defer to those who have seen him do something so far, one of those being Tim Deruyter.
Well, as we looked in the offseason, knowing that Tyree was going to be going to the pros, you want to get a guy who's exceptional as an edge rusher. And so we looked at all the guys in the portal, really primarily looking for a guy who can rush the passer. And we thought he was a guy that had a different get-off than most everybody else that was in that portal. He hadn't played a ton, but he played some, quality reps. And we thought he really fit what we are looking for in that position. And since he's been here, he's gained a ton of weight. He's jumped in with 2 feet. Really like the way he works. And, we haven't slowed down our install. And he's picking things up. He's a smart player who works hard. And I think his future's very, very bright.
Yeah, and I think I think it tells you a lot about Linton in that they – as good as Pierre was at that edge spot, they moved Linton there at the tail end of last season. I say they moved Linton there and then moved Pierre back to kind of one of the Mike or Will linebacker. And I just, I think this is going to be somebody that is asked to kind of replace the disruption that Tyree Wilson caused, an impossible task. But I think, luck. Yeah, exactly. But I think he's about 6. I've stood by him. He's about 6'3" maybe a little taller, about 230, and very smart, very quick and athletic. I think we've talked about this some before, in that Syracuse asked him to do some different things with their scheme and kind of, get inside a bit in some of those fits instead of being on the edge and kind of playing the field and doing some different things. And I think Texas Tech able to identify it. But all that being said, he's shown up here. And I think that, for the head coach, for the defensive coordinator, for other players, James Blanchard has kind of stuck it out there and said, look, man, best edge rushing duo, talking about him and Miles Cole, that may be in the Big 12. I think everybody, is heaping a ton of praise. And by all accounts, I think Steve Linton is a fairly kind of quiet guy. I don't think he's like this loud and boisterous rah-rah asking for all this attention or expectation or whatever. He's just kind of out there playing ball and doing his thing. Heck, he might not even be aware of it. I don't know. But those of us that are listening to these people in charge of this program in various aspects certainly have mentioned Mr. Linton's name a lot and frequently, and we've just gotten started here in the spring.
Did you, when you were standing next to him, did you try to move him off his spot just to test the leverage?
You like that term, don't you? Yeah.
Because you're no pint-sized guy yourself, Chris. I'm just wondering how Steve might stack up to Big Handsome. Hey, we're running out of time, but I want to get to this other name because you're kind of talking about him right there as far as how one affected the other or the domino between the two in Linton and Jesiah Pierre, who absolutely came on as the season went along last year. Here's Coach Deruyter on Pierre.
Well, he's going to be both at Mike and Will, but he's looked really, really good. I didn't realize when we came here last year, he had played like an outside position for them. I assumed he was an edge, just looking at his length and looking for what we were looking for, and I thought he did some good things. But he told me in the offseason that he had played inside before, and we're lacking a little bit of experience inside, and whether he played inside a year ago in our system or just in general, it's hard to replace game reps, especially at Division I level. So we put him in there, and he's still picking up the terminology, but he's got really good movement for an inside linebacker. We do a lot of things. If you remember last year where our inside backers are going to walk to an edge, so it kind of goes with what he's already done in the past. So if he can pick that up, and I think he can, it gives us a chance to have another weapon as an inside guy who can also combo as an outside guy.
So what this allows is, because what Tim is talking about is Jesiah and Krishan were just about as durable of a linebacker tandem as there was in the league. They were extremely productive. I think they flashed at times, but they were just steady and made plays. And I think that you couldn't have asked for anything more. I mean, that's one of the things. We should spend some time on that someday. You've been on a really good run here with good linebackers, man. Dakota Allen, Jordan Brooks, Rico Jeffers, Colin Schooler. I mean, you've had some serious dudes here that are either in the NFL or in the XFL or whatever, because you just been on a nice run. And I think Jesiah and Krishan belong in that conversation, absolutely, which is a heck of a compliment.
100%.
And so trying to replace those guys is the biggest question you've got on your entire defense. I don't think it's trying to replace Tyree Wilson. I think it's who do we have that can play those two linebacker spots? And as Tim said, we really need four guys. So when you come into camp or come into spring I guess practices, not actually camp. But Jacob Rodriguez, I thought, was going to be one of those guys. He's out. He's got a shoulder issue. He's out for the spring. Tyreek Matthews is a guy that played some last year. He's an older guy, but I think Pierre, it gives them an answer potentially. Now let's dare to dream a little bit. What if by some way we get word on Josiah Eldridge in the next couple of weeks that he is back and he can play, and he's been out there, he's been out at practices, he's been. He can't practice, but he's been out there, which he's allowed to do, and working out on his own here in Lubbock and all those things. But what if you get him back? All of a sudden, I think you go from – it just adds more, like, expectation, or it adds more, because at that point, you've kind of solved one of your issues. It also allows Jesiah Pierre – to really be kind of this guy that could fill in behind Linton. He could fill in behind at linebacker. It just makes you deeper and better. So you're protected from injury. You're protected from if Tim doesn't want to play one of these guys 90 plays, he just wants to play him 60. Now you get a fresh, very good athlete in there that is playing the other. I mean, it just makes you that much better. So because that's the first thing I thought of, is that if Josiah comes back, I mean it really, makes somebody like Jesiah Pierre like this luxury. I mean, he's this guy that, like, he's a really good, old, experienced player. We could sit him off the edge. We can put him in the middle. We can do a variety of different things, but we are now protected. He's a hell of an insurance policy if you get Jesiah Eldridge eligible, but we'll see. Otherwise, he could be a starter next to somebody like Jacob Rodriguez if that's the way it works out.
You don't know where he could be coming from. Could be rappelling from the construction crane on the south end. You better keep your head on a swivel with Jesiah Pierre.
And my favorite thing about Jesiah Pierre, JP, whatever anybody wants to call him, is that Keith Patterson, when he was the DC, we were sitting in the hotel lobby before Texas Tech played Houston, so 2 seasons ago, and the game was in Houston, and we knew how big that game was. But he's like, Pierre walked by and he goes, water moccasin right there. He goes, he can get after it. Because he's from Florida or played at University of Florida. Anyway, KP always had nicknames for everybody. So I just thought, I've never forgotten that. And Pierre thinks that he thought it was hilarious. But, man, he's a really good football player. I'm glad you have him.
Man, that group of linebackers has been a ton of fun to watch and quite a luxury, I think, over the last decade plus, really, when you're talking about some of the guys you mentioned. I mean, Schooler, Jeffers, Merriweather, Jordan Brooks, all the way back to Blake Dees and Kenny Williams, who you left off the list for some reason. I'm not quite sure. But either way, hope you can keep that run going. Chris, enjoyed the time and the perspectives. As always, my man, we have got a coaching search ongoing that will continue to cover for some period of time. We do believe this week brings about 0 hour. We'll see what it holds tonight as Coach McCasland and company are back in action in the NIT, or possibly a few days from now. But we'll be here either way to take it in with you. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube so you miss nothing. Chris, thanks for the time, man. Enjoyed it as always.
Enjoyed it. Yeah, appreciate it, Coach Cowan. We'll talk to you later as the week goes along, and we'll see what happens with this NIT game tonight because closure could be near, question mark. I don't know. We'll see.
That's right. All right. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Make us your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts each day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. For Chris, I'm Casey. Have a great one. We'll see you on the other side on Locked On Texas Tech.